Try to do this the right way now. There we go. All right. Welcome to Book by Book. Tonight, we're only going to go over 2 chapters. So I know we've had like marathons in the past, but tonight I was prepping for this week, and I was going to originally go from 20 to 22, but 22 is a song, is one of David's songs of praise. And 22 and 23 kind of fit better together. So I was like, I'm just going to wrap at 21, and we will look at some of David's final acts as king. Well, I shouldn't say final acts, because this is where the standards for chronology are a little more squishy in the ancient world. We want everything to happen in order, for like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. The events of chapter 20 and 21, we don't know for sure when they happened in the life of David. We just know that they happened because they're captured here. And so they could have been earlier in David's reign and then just placed here in the narrative, just because they wanted to make sure that they captured these events. So the same thing happens with the Gospels, where the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the synoptics, and they're called that because they have a same view pretty much. But even the synoptics, they move things around in a way that the writer is not like ignoring chronology, but they're telling the story in a way where they're trying to hit themes more than they're trying to hit a timeline. And so here, as we're concluding David's reign, the person who put together, or the people who put together 2 Samuel, are adding these stories because they want to highlight these things for various reasons. Sometimes you may wonder what these reasons are, and there's not always a great answer. But part of the challenge is, when's a good time to talk about a famine? When's a good time to talk about the people who served in David's military as just a list of who's in the military? Because that's all part of what's happening here at the end of these books. So chapter, I said 20, right? Yeah, 20 and 21. Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. So, yeah, let's jump in here. Chapter 20, we're going to look through verse 13. First, now a troublemaker named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there. He sounded the trumpet and shouted. So this is right after David crossed the Jordan. So this part is happening right here at the end of the conflict with Absalom, as David is being reinstated to the kingdom. And then we've got this troublemaker named Sheba. And he sounded the trumpet and shouted, "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son, every man to his tent, Israel." So not like a great song, but so all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, son of Bichri, but the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from the Jordan to Jerusalem. When David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to care for the palace and put them in a house under guard. He provided for them, but had no sexual relations with them. They were kept in confinement till the day of their death, living as widows. We'll pause here. So the Israelites, the 10 tribes of the north, they head back home. The tribe of Judah, they escort David back to Jerusalem. This is a great foreshadowing for the tension that is going to be happening for the future between Judah and the northern kingdom. And one of the big challenges is the idea that we have no share in the sons of David. And so their claim is like, there's 10 of us and there's one tribe of Judah. And so we should have 10%, or not 10%, 10 shares worth of David's attention instead of Judah having all of David's attention. And so this is part of the friction that's going to be coming for the people. And so after Solomon dies and Rehoboam becomes king, there's going to be the schism and the two kingdoms are going to separate, but it all, like, those seeds are planted all the way back here. And so they go back, and David will do the work to try to, bring them in, and Solomon is going to expand the kingdom and try to unify. All these different things will happen, but ultimately the kingdom, the tribes will break apart. And so David goes back to his palace, and the 10 concubines that he left there to care for the palace. If we remember, Absalom slept with them as basically like a power move. Like, I am taking over my father's kingdom. I'm taking his secondary wives. And so now the law would say David cannot go back and have sexual relations with these women. That would be an abomination in the law. And so he provides for them, but he will never be with them again. So that's why it talks about them living as widows, and like living widows. So, and we don't really hear much more about them. David still has his wives that he will, his wives will endure. So, all right, so that's the scene. He's coming back in to the palace. Verse 6. Hey, Michael. David said to Abishai, now Sheva, son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us. So Joab's men and the Kerethites and Pelethites and all the mighty warriors went out under the command of Abishai. They marched out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheva, son of Bichri. While they were at the great rock in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Joab was wearing his military tunic and sorry, I skipped something. Verse 4, I went too early. Then the king said to Amasa, summon the men of Judah to come with me 3 days and be here yourself. But when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the time the king had sent for him. So then David has Abishai go after Sheva. While they were at the great rock in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Joab was wearing his military tunic, and strapped over it at his waist was a belt with a dagger in its sheath. As he stepped forward, it dropped out of its sheath. Joab said to Amasa, how are you, my brother? Then Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. Amasa was not on his guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab plunged it into his belly, and his intestines spilled out on the ground. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheva, son of Bichri. So let's pause here, because Amasa, last week when David was coming back over the Jordan, and he was trying to win the people of Judah over to him, because remember, the people of Judah weren't quick to escort him back across, and so he's like, I will make Amasa the leader of the army over Joab. And so, because Joab had brought Absalom back and then killed Absalom, and so David's got beef with Absalom, and so he's trying to make peace with with the rest of his tribe by elevating Amasa, who's another relative, and saying, like, you will be the one who will lead the army. And so he gives Amasa a chance here to say, hey, come in 3 days and let's go after Sheva. And Amasa takes too long. And so he then goes to Joab's brother Abishai and says, you're going to do this. So let's muster everybody together and we'll go. And so while Joab is not in charge, he is tagging along. And so he is with Abishai when Amasa finally arrives. And the way that he does this, like, he's wearing his tunic, and the commentators are like, we don't really understand what his move is here, because he like bends down and like his dagger comes out, and so like he looks unarmed, but he picks it up with his left hand, which would be his non-dominant hand. And so that's one of the reasons why Amasa probably wasn't on guard. It says Amasa wasn't on guard, and he grabs him by the beard. And so it isn't necessarily like that he's pulling his hair, But there's something happening here where this is the only time we read this, grabbed him by the beard to kiss him in a greeting, but it's like grabbed him by the beard and pulled him close and stabbed him at the same time. And this is Joab's like power move now. Like, yes, David gave Amasa the generalship. I'm going to take it back. Is basically what Joab is doing here. Joab is not a good dude. He is the more we read about Joab, the more ruthless he becomes. And this is one more evidence of that. And later, David will tell Solomon, hey, don't let that old man go to the grave with gray hair. Like, let him, he needs to be taken out. And so while David is not going to do the deed of bringing Joab to justice, David does see the need for Joab to be brought to justice eventually. So verse 11, one of Joab's men stood beside Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the man saw that all the troops came to a halt there. When he realized that everyone who came up to Amasa stopped, he dragged him from the road into a field and threw a garment over him. After Amasa had been removed from the road, everyone went on with Joab to pursue Sheva, son of Bichri. So, so he's one of the reasons why everybody stopped was because it could be that they were shocked that Joab did this, but also if we remember, blood makes you unclean. And so there's a dead body in the middle of the road. What are we going to do about this? And because these folks who are with David, they are, they may be thinking like, I am a part of David's army. And in the past, David's army was treated like they were on holy war. And so touching anything unclean, sleeping with their wives even, would make them unclean and unable to participate in a holy war. So if they were all stopping and saying like, there's a dead body here, like what, I can't move past here. So that's why this man may have, while he's calling everybody to allegiance to Joab and David, also realizing like, there's a dead body in the way. So that should be a red flag. Just in general, if there's a, anyway, stop, Jason, focus. Verse 14, Sheva passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth Maacah, and through the entire region of the Bichrites, who gathered together and followed him. All the troops of Joab came and besieged Sheva in Abel Beth Maacah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the wall to bring it down, a wise woman called from the city, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak to him. He went toward her, and she asked, are you Joab? I am, he answered. She said, listen to what your servant has to say. I am listening, he said. She continued, long ago, they used to say, get your answer at Abel. And that settled it. We are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance? Far be it from me, Joab replied. Far be it from me to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case. A man named Sheva came, son of Bichri, from all the hill country of Ephraim, has lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Hand over this one man, and I will withdraw from your city. The woman said to Joab, his head will be thrown to you from the wall. The Bible's awesome. I'm sorry. It's just like, what? Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off the head of Sheva, son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he sounded the trumpet, and his men dispersed from the city, each returning to his home, and Joab went back to the king in Jerusalem. So, have you all seen Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail? I love that movie. It's great. I was watching it, like trying to see, like, can I watch this with my kids? And I was laughing so hard by myself. I was like, this is such a great movie. But that scene where they go to the French people and that John Cleese is up there doing a terrible French accent, that's how I see this whole scene, but only it's a wise woman. So it's Terry Jones instead, saying, Brian's not the Messiah. That's a different movie. But this is fascinating because Bichri goes all the way north, like way north. He's running as far away from David as he can and still be in Israel. He's going for it. He's gathering people together. They go into this city, Abel, and we don't really know for sure where this is, but it's in the northern region. And all the technique that they're doing, building these siege ramps, pounding on the walls, all of this stuff is typical siege work mentality. And finally, this old woman just calls out to the general in a way that only grandmas can do. Like, who do you think you are? I'm trying to take a nap, like that kind of thing. And so she calls out and says, like, we are a place of peace. People used to come to us for wisdom and decisions, and now you're trying to tear us all down. And Joab is reasonable here, because remember, he is ruthless, but he also is efficient. He's like, I don't want to tear your city down. I just want one guy. And so she's like, all right, well, we'll send his head over. And she goes in and talks to all these people. And Sheva has an army, like here in the city. And this woman is able to convince everybody, even his army, let's just get rid of it. This guy doesn't need his head anymore. And they agree and throws it over the wall, and Joab goes back. War is over. David has secured the throne again. That Sheva, who has been his rival and the person who is taunting him and saying how terrible he is, he's dealt with. So Joab's like, I brought peace. I'm going home. So even though Joab was not the general who was sent out to get Sheva, he's the one who brought his head back to David. Verse 23, then this is where the chronology starts to get, like, we don't know exactly when these events happened, but they are included. So from here on out, because it starts with David's officials. Joab was over Israel's entire army. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites. Adoniram was in charge of forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheva was secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jairite was David's priest. So there's a couple things here that are significant. The first is Adoniram was in charge of forced labor. This is the first, like, cabinet level position that we see of somebody who's overseen enforced slavery for the people of Israel. There were different times, like and we'll look at the Gibeonites in the next section, where people were brought in as woodcutters and water carriers, and the Gibeonites in particular, because of their deception to Joshua during the conquest. The Gibeonites were under a curse for their deception. But this is really the first time that somebody's like in charge of forced labor, which will be a problem later. And one of the challenges with Solomon's expansion of the kingdom is conscription of labor. And the forced labor was not supposed to be any Israelites, but the people who were like the Gibeonites, who were living among them. They were becoming more and more assimilated to the ways of the people of Israel. And so while they were not Jews, they were not Hebrews, they were still a part of the kingdom. And so there was oppression happening. And so this is a red flag. And then this beginning of chapter 20, there's that red flag of, we have no share in David. Like that mentality. These things are foreshadowing for us things that are going to happen in the future. And so that is something just to note, that there is this person in charge of forced labor. And then we have Zadok and Abiathar were priests. So they were working in the tabernacle complex. And then Ira the Jairite was David's priest. And so David had another priest who was most likely like a trusted rabbi, teacher, advisor, but not like necessarily doing offerings and sacrifices for him. Like it wasn't necessarily like that separate from a priest totally separate from the tabernacle, but more of a advisory role in the palace. So, all right. So then we go to chapter 21, and this this is one of those events that we're like, when did this actually happen? We don't know. And it could be that this was included here because of this list of officials, and Adoniram was in charge of forced labor. Like the Gibeonites were a part of that enforced labor water carrier woodcutter system. So yeah, so if you've been following along with us all these months and going through Joshua, remember I think it's chapter 9. These people come, the Israelites are advancing and defeating these different nations, and the Gibeonites hear about it and they're like, here, let's make a ruse, and we will dress up in raggedy clothes and bring moldy old bread, and we're like, sir, we have come from so far away. Make a covenant with us that we will not be a curse to you, and you will not be a curse to us. And they looked at all their stuff and like, yeah, this looks like they came from really far away. All right, we won't attack you. And then the Gibeonites were like, sucker, we got you. We're going back home. So then they were, Joshua said, all right, we're still going to rule over you. We're not going to destroy you because we made this agreement, but we are going to, you're in our land now, is basically how Joshua treated the Gibeonites. And they had this covenant, and we will read here, Saul broke it. So during the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, it is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. And we do not know when he did this. We don't have any record of Saul attacking the Gibeonites in the life of Saul in 1 Samuel. So we're not sure when that happened. Several of the different commentaries said this event probably happened earlier in the reign of David. But again, it just was captured here. The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not a part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. So he was a Israel first kind of guy, make Israel great again. Let's get rid of these Gibeonites. That's kind of what Saul's mentality here is. The Bible is not saying that Saul was right. So there is a curse happening because of Saul's action. David asked the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance? The Gibeonites answered him, we have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death. What do you want me to do for you? David asked. So their response here is like, we have no power in this country, is how we should read the Gibeonites' response. We have no power. We assume no power. And so he's putting it all back to David. Like, you're the only one who can do anything. And so David says, then I'm not asking you to do anything. What do you want me to do? So David is going to take ownership of a solution that the Gibeonites put forward. And they answered the king, as for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us, so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed, and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one. So the king said, I will give them to you. The king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. But the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Ahiah's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with the 5 sons of Saul's daughter and daughter Merav, whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai, the Maholathite. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed them and exposed their bodies on the hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. So we'll pause there. This is an interesting solution. Their solution for the death or the violence committed against them was to not wantonly just execute people, but to bring the justice to the person's family that brought great pain to them. And the Gibeonites want to execute these 7 people and then leave their bodies out as a display to the Lord. And this is really close to a human sacrifice type thing, which is uncomfortable for me as I read through this. Like, this is not a feel-good story about anybody at all. It's atrocity met with atrocity, and it's a tragedy all around. And so David agrees because he is trying to avenge the blood guilt that Saul brought on a whole people group. And so that's where it's not about a sacrifice as much as it is about justice. And this is one of those few times where we would say the sins of the father are visited upon the next generation. Throughout Scripture, we're told over and over again that you should not do that. You are responsible for your sin, but sinfulness is passed on. And so cursing, I will bless the righteous to 1,000 generations, but the curses of the unrighteous to the 7th generation, that's just because it passes on over and over and over again. It's not like God is saying, I'm going to curse you. It's like, no, you were modeled how to be sinful. Your son's going to model how to be sinful. Their son's going to model how to be sinful. And that's the curses that he's talking about there. This is one of those few times where it's like, no, somebody needs to be avenged. And so they agree to this. Now, Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son. He is spared because of the covenant with David and Jonathan, but there's this other Mephibosheth who is Rizpah's son, and Rizpah is Saul's concubine. And so these are the descendants, how it's all kind of, the family tree is all coming together. These are descendants of Saul who are not in line and not in Jonathan's line. This is a different line of people, but still descendants of Saul. So they agree to do this, and this is happening right as the barley harvest is preparing to be harvested, and so just before the rains are supposed to come is what we should mark here. They are doing this when they're anticipating rain. There hasn't been a good rain for 3 years. This famine has been happening, and so they're hoping that this will cleanse the land of the blood guilt of Saul. This is essentially what's going on. So they do this, and Rizpah, daughter of Ahiah, so the mother of these sons, and took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies, she did not let the birds touch them by day or the wild animals by night. When David was told what Ahiah's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. They had stolen their bodies from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck Saul down on Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father, Kish, and Zela in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered prayer in behalf of the land. So Rizpah is out protecting the corpses of her family. And it doesn't say exactly how long she's out there, but long enough that they notice. She's fighting off the birds and the wild animals, making a big fire, making a lot of noise, probably not sleeping. She's out there by herself doing this because part of the shame of this whole situation is to leave anybody exposed any body exposed overnight was just a shameful act. So even Absalom, who tried to kill the king, they didn't leave his body exposed. They killed him and they threw him in a pit and covered him with rocks. And if Absalom, who tried to overthrow the king, is given that level of respect, even though it's not a great level of respect, then these people did not do anything to the Gibeonites. This is a very shameful treatment of their bodies. And so Rizpah is trying to protect them. And David is moved by this. He's moved by her compassion for her sons and her family. And so he honors Saul and Jonathan in another way as well, because it's part of the tradition is to be gathered. When you die, your bones were gathered into a box. It was called an ossuary, and you were placed in the family tomb with your ancestors. To not be placed in the family tomb was another level of disconnection. And we talk about the Lord's inheritance, and the inheritance was tied to the land. And so for Saul and Jonathan to be in their bodies and remains to be in Jabesh Gilead, for them to be removed from Saul's father's hometown and from the father's tomb, that was a disgrace. And so David sees the compassion of Rizpah and is moved to say, all right, I want to make sure that these people who did not do anything to the Gibeonites, even in this act, that they would be at least given the honor of being gathered with their ancestors, of their tomb, their bones being collected and put in the family tomb. And while I'm at it, let's bring Jonathan and Saul as well, and unite the sons of Kish, the family of Kish, into the family tomb. They're all together. So one of the things, talking about like, why is this here, could be that 2 Samuel, the scroll of 2 Samuel, starts with David hearing about Saul's death. And so at the end of the scroll of 2 Samuel, we're reminded again of Saul's death. And so there could be the reason that this is included here is like David did ultimately honor Saul, even though Saul tried to kill David over and over. So that could be one of the reasons why this is here, but it is one last act of kindness to Jonathan's family in particular. So yeah, all weird and different cultural stuff that like we don't necessarily think about. And when you read through this story, it's like, this is so bizarre. And it is. And it's tragic. And it's hard to really get a good handle on like, why did this all happen? But yeah, I mean, part of it is to show Rizpah's compassion, but also to show that David, even however old he could be, this could be late in his life, it could be early in his reign, however old he doesn't want to just be like Saul, who just killed people just because. But he has compassion even in these hard decisions. And the result is the Lord brings rain. He hears the prayers about the land, and he brings rain. So, all right. One more section here on the wars against the Philistines. And this could be several different events kind of combined together as we are wrapping up David's life. And the greatest enemy for the people of Israel during David's reign was the Philistines. And so here we are getting like a summation of all that the Philistines did and how David and his men were victorious over the Philistines. Verse 15, once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. And Ishbi-Benob one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Never again will you go out with us to battle, so the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." So let's pause there. So this is the first of these accounts, and this passage could give us a reason why David was still in Jerusalem. If we break out the chronology and say this didn't happen necessarily at the end of David's life, but earlier, like in chapter 11, David was in Jerusalem and his army was out. And this could be the reason why David was in Jerusalem. His people, his soldiers were like, don't come out with us anymore. And so he's fighting and he's exhausted. And this Philistine with a new sword, I love that it's like, this is a brand new sword I'm going to try to kill you with, and a spearhead that weighed 300 shekels. And I always want to know how much that actually is. And it is, I had copied it. Where'd it go? It's a lot. It's heavy. So yes, thank you. It is roughly equivalent to 7.5 pounds, which is on the edge of a spear. Now I have a 5-pound dumbbell, right? And I can hold it for a while and like I can exercise with it. But you throw a 7.5 pound weight on a long stick, that's going to get heavy and hard to work. And so that they're trying to say, like, this guy is strong and he can work with this spear and this brand new sword. And so he sees David's tired. He's like, I'm going to try to kill him. And who comes to his rescue but Abishai, brother of Joab, the guy who is always there, right on time, and is an excellent warrior. And he defeats him. And so this is when they say to him, never come out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished. Now, the lamp of Israel is an interesting image because in the tabernacle, we have these different pieces of tabernacle furniture. We have the Ark of the Covenant, which is in the Holy of the Holies. And then in the next room out, the most holy place, or the holy place, we have the table of showbread with the 12 different loaves of bread that are representing the tribes of Israel that are regularly repeated, shuffled out. And then we have on the other side of the room, the lamp stand with 7 different lamps on these stands. And that is supposed to represent the light of God shining on the people of Israel. And so here, we have these people saying, David, you are like that lamp for us. You are the light for us as the leader of our nation. And while we have that lampstand in the tabernacle, when we go out to fight, we're looking to you to lead, to guide. But if you are on the front lines and letting, what's his face here, Ishbi-Benob, kill you, you don't want to be killed by a guy named Ishbi-Benob, do you? So stay back, stay back, and let us just trust us here. And so this is maybe why David doesn't go out to battle after chapter 10. So in another instance, in the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. At the time, Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. So another battle, kills another guy, descendant of Rapha. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. Now this one creates some tension in study of the life of David, because chapter 19 is more closely translated in this way. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair Ogarem, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with the shaft like a weaver's rod. The NIV is making some decisions here to call this other Philistine the brother of Goliath the Gittite, but that's not in the text. And so it sounds like this Elhanan killed Goliath and David didn't. So people have tried to say, all right, what's happening here? Because there's different variations in the manuscripts in the text that can, you can say, well, one of these translations is an error. And that could be, there could be an error in some of these different manuscripts. Other people have said this could be Elhanan, son of Jair Ogarim. Elhanan could be David's family name, and David becomes his king name. So he changed his name when he became king. That's another argument that is put forward. There's no real good answer. Like either way, you're like, well, we don't know. It could be there's another guy named Goliath, and there's another guy from Bethlehem who killed another guy named Goliath. That could also be. We don't really know. And this verse is one of those things when you read it where it's like, well, what's right? And ultimately, we have to have a little bit of mystery here and be willing to say, like, it could be another Goliath. It could be David's name. It could be an heir. We can't really know for sure what's going on. And the way that, like, as I was reading through, the thing that makes the most sense, really, and this is not, I'm not trying to throw anybody's faith into question here, but the thing that makes the most sense is that in one of these manuscripts, there was an error. That's the thing that just makes the most sense to me. Like there could be just a copyist who made a mistake, and that was the tradition that just kept on going down the line. And ultimately, whatever happened in 2 Samuel 21, verse 19, is not an issue of our faith. It's not if this was wrong, nothing else in here matters anymore. Like that is, it shouldn't weigh that much for us, like on 22, verse 19. But I did not want to just zoom past it, because as we read through it, like another Goliath and the spear like a weaver's rod, all of these things sound so much like what happened in 1 Samuel 17 that it is important to at least highlight, like, this is a verse that is in question, but the narrative overall is still a key part of what's happening here. Is we're accounting for David's victories over the Philistines. And so if this is David's family name, and later when he became king, he changed name, cool. We don't know. The thing that lends credence to that is David is the only David in the whole Bible. There's no other person named David in the Bible. So for a king to take a name when he ascends to the throne, okay, it doesn't sound like any other names in the Bible either. It's so unique that yeah, he could have a family name. So yeah, and we can talk about questions about that later. Verse 20, in still another battle which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descendants of Rapha in Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. So the Rapha, I don't know if you noticed that there were these descendant of Rapha, descendant of Rapha, descendant of Rapha. And these are part of the giant tradition in the ancient Middle East here, like who are the Rapha, the Raphaim. And so I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about this, because this has been the Raphaim, and I'm going to read this, has been interpreted as a deity whose cult center was in Gath, so in the Philistine headquarters. These quarrels between David and the group of Philistine warriors, they were all part of this descendant piece that you could go trace all the way back to Genesis chapter 6 with the Nephilim. When the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were pleasing, and they came and they had children with them. And so is this some kind of mysterious, supernatural, fallen angel impregnating women thing? I don't know. It is bizarre. It's bizarre. But these giants among the Philistines were distinct. And when we read in Genesis 6, these are the heroes of old. I'm just going to go to it real quick. I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. Yeah, verse 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of human and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. And so this tradition here of these men of renown, heroes of old, like traces forward to people like the Raphaim, the descendants of Rapha, these giants among men. And so there is a spiritual component to what could be happening here at the end as well. These are part of the reasons why the Canaanites needed to be pushed out of the land of Israel, was because there were these spiritual connotations to the Raphaim and the Nephilim and these people who were not God's design for humanity. And so that could be a part of what's going on here as well. So this chapter is full of weird stuff. And so when you read the Bible, and sometimes you just read through like, yeah, another giant killed, yeah. But it's like, slow down. The writer is trying to tell you something more than just they killed a bunch of giants. Like, who are these giants? Who are they connected to? And is it a part of this Nephilim piece from way back when? Maybe. Maybe. So, all right, so we'll stop there and we'll do 22, 23, and 24 next week. Yeah, any questions on all that we covered tonight? Any questions? Oh, I don't know. They took it back to Jerusalem and showed David. Probably. But I mean, at this point, I don't know how concerned Joab is with his ceremonial cleanness. So yeah. But yeah, one of the best ways to show that you killed somebody was to take their hands or their feet or their head. And so there's earlier story where somebody cut off the hands of people to say, no, these are the people, we killed them. So yeah, so it's proof of death. So to bring it back, say, here's what matters of Sheba. He's not going anywhere without this.
Well, it had to be the best proof.
Yeah, it would be, because you could say, yeah, that I recognize that guy. He was telling me that I was worthless just a few days ago. So, yeah. So I just love this old lady. I was like, what do you need? I'll throw his head over the wall for you. And like, I just imagine she didn't even like go to the top of the wall, and like they just cut it off and like, yeah, just fling it over, get him out of here. I don't know. But those stories in the Bible are, in the junior high boy in me is like, that's so awesome. But then the adult in me, yeah, probably. It's like, any volunteers? Yeah, but it's like, and now as a 41-year-old person is like, this is all gross and sad. Like these kinds of stories, I'm like, oh, more people died. This is like sinfulness and jealousy and rage and all of these things that are captured in the historical books. Got me super into it when I was in junior high. But the more I see the brokenness of the world continuing on in our lives, in our time, it's like, war sucks. War is awful. And yeah, so I try to not glorify it, but at the same time, it's like, this is so weird. I gotta talk about it. It's so weird. So yeah, good question, Chris. And did you have a question, Kevin?
Yeah. You know, when David allowed the Gibeonites to kill Saul's descendants.
Yeah.
You'd think that would be like another issue for the Israelite or the Israelite tribes saying, okay, here's David again, and
Right. Going
doing bad against us.
Yeah, going to the tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yet later in the chapter, then he kind of, is kind of the opposite, kind of finding favor with the Benjamites by honoring Saul.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Something said about that, but
Yeah, I mean, it could be that the Benjamites have been so thoroughly subdued by David also that they know, like, David is king. We are never going to be back because his enemies that have risen up from the tribe of Benjamin have all been squashed. And so, yeah, and there could have been a council as well here. We don't know for sure. Like the Gibeonites coming to David and David's the elders of Israel even being there, and the Gibeonites saying, like, this is what we want. And so not necessarily that David just was the only one who heard this. Like, I got to go kill 7 of Saul's descendants. Sorry, everybody.
yeah.
But like there could have been a larger group of people involved, that could have seen, like, yes, we are in a famine. We are in a bad way as a nation. We need to do something, and we need to avenge the guilt. And while we don't have Saul's actions recorded in scripture, like, it seems like everybody knew about it. So, yeah, so it could be that this is a kind of reparation that everybody was like, this was a not a good thing that Saul did, and we recognize that we should probably make it right.
So is that why the final phrase there after that, God answered prayer on behalf of the land?
Yeah.
14.
Yeah. So the famine came because of Saul's unjust act towards the Gibeonites, who they had a covenant with, and Saul broke the covenant. And whenever there is a broken covenant in scripture, there are consequences. And the covenant, the delicacy of that covenant was because the people of Israel were not supposed to make any covenant with the people in the land in the first place, but God is honoring their decision to make this covenant because they were deceived. And so now Saul's action is like, well, we should just do this now, even though we didn't do it then. And the Lord's like, no, you made a promise. You made a covenant with these people, and God is a God who defends covenants. So, yeah, but yeah, so when this is finally resolved, God answered the prayers in behalf of the land, because part of this as well is this land is God's land. He owns it. Like, he calls it mine, and you all get to live there, is basically his relationship with Israel. Like, I've created this place for you, but always remember, it's not yours. When you die, it goes to your descendants, because ultimately it's God's land. So, yeah, but not an easy passage to preach on. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this way, because I have to say, here's 4 steps about how to be like Ritzpah. I hope none of us ever find ourselves there. So, yeah, any other questions? Anyone online? Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the descendants, that are mixed with godlike folks and earthly folks. Has there been any other mention of them further on in the chapters leading up to the New Testament? And is it a possibility that they have descendants? I'm just wondering.
D, that is such a good question. So if you didn't hear in the room, she's asking about the Nephilim, the descendants of the Nephilim and the Rephaites. Let us turn to the book of Jude. It's in the New Testament. It's Jude is right before Revelation. So are there other references to these people? Anytime we read about the Anakites, the Rephaites, Rephaim, those are both connected back to the Nephilim. And when we see in Jude, I gotta find it. It's not a long book, so just give me a moment. Verse 6, Jude 6. I'll start with 5. Though you already know all this, I want you to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment in the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as examples of those who suffer the punishment of eternal life. In the very same way, on the strength of their dreams, these ungodly people pollute their own bodies, reject authority, and heap abuse on celestial beings. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not himself dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Yet these people slander whatever they do not understand, and the very things they do understand by instinct, as irrational animals do, will destroy them. Woe to them! They have taken the way of Cain, but have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. So these ungodly forces here, going all the way back to the angels who did not keep their position of the authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. That is potentially Jude referring back to the tradition around the Nephilim and looking at all of the different levels of corruption and sinfulness, going all the way back to that Genesis 6 incident and the influence of that sinfulness in the world. Does that make sense? It's complicated. It gets real weird here. And I would turn you to a person named Michael Heiser. And he is he's a Bible scholar. Semitic languages is his PhD, and he did a lot of work on Deuteronomy 32 and the Psalm, I think 81. Sorry, talking about this idea of the heavenly council and these spiritual forces. Maybe it's not Psalm 81. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he has a book called The Unseen Realm. And it is an academic book, but it is also, it's not inaccessible. But he talks a lot about what these things could be in a way better manner than I can do, because he's a lot smarter than me. But we have a tendency to try to explain everything in Scripture from a postmodern Enlightenment point of view. And one of the challenges is we have to also be able to read in a way that is, ancient world. How would the people in the ancient world have understood these texts? And would they be much more open to the idea that fallen angels would take advantage of human beings? And that's part of the question here. Like, is that what's happening? And if it is, what are the ramifications for the rest of the Scriptures? How does that shape the way that we see people, and the evilness in the Scriptures and the people who are handed over to destruction in Scripture? It's more than just, well, they were bad people, but there was a corruption happening that was outside of God's design, that God is bringing correction for. Now, the danger here is you can look at people you disagree with and just say, they're Nephilim, they're descendants of Rapha, get rid of them. And that's not what we should be doing. That's not our job today. But to recognize, the Scriptures are more mysterious than we feel comfortable with sometimes, and that's okay. to be able to say like, I don't really know what's happening here, but there is more going on than just my postmodern Enlightenment worldview imported onto the text. So does that make sense? Is that helpful at all?
Somewhat.
All right. Yeah,
Well,
it's so complicated. But
I did learn from a professor of mine, he's a reverend, that when you learn something and it leaves you more baffled and with questions, that tells you that you're actually learning. So
yeah,
that's why you have more questions. So that's not a bad thing.
good. Yeah. Well, I would hope that we would have a lot of questions. So anytime we feel like we know it all, then we are in a dangerous place. And so, yeah, but the little book of Jude has so much in it that is, if we really take our time working through all of the things that Jude referenced in that little section, like the archangel wrestling with the devil over the body of Moses, what? So it's awesome when you think, but there's this tradition that happens between the close of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. This what we call the Apocrypha. There's all kinds of writing that's happening during there, even though we say that there's no prophetic voice, that there are writers and people who are talking about the things of God and trying to make sense of the world. And so a lot of what Jude is referencing there is in the Apocrypha. And so getting into those books is not something where it's like, well, these are the same level as scripture for us, but to say that these are the things that are shaping the world that Jesus lived in, that Jesus was responding to, and that his disciples were responding to. It's like if somebody were to look back into our time and to say like, well, who are the most important voices writing? And they never mentioned anything about like just Game of Thrones or even Tolkien, like J.R. Tolkien, like those ideas that are in the Lord of the Rings. Those are big ideas that have actually shaped a lot of the ways that people tell stories outside of Lord of the Rings. Like we were watching the movies, Joss and I, and she was like, oh, that's like in Harry Potter. And I was like, she stole that from Tolkien, and so like this came first. And so like those kinds of things where we see like Jesus responding to questions that people have in the Gospels, there's questions that are being raised that are coming out of these writings that were around but are not a part of scripture. And so, yeah, so we should not be afraid to read these things and just be like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what to do with it, but it's enlightening to say like there's a bigger question going on than just this means this means this, da, 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 da. But try to say, all right, what's the world that Jesus is living in? So, yeah, because it's big. It's a big world and it's awesome.
Yeah, that's-
So, yeah. So, yeah, have a lot of questions, D. Good point. All right. Well, let's wrap up here. So we did 2 chapters and we went longer than normal. So this is great. So next week we will finish up 2 Samuel. So that'll be the end of that book. And then we'll take the following week off and come back we'll come back and finish up or start up in 1 Kings. So, all right. So next week here, following week, not here. The end. So I'll see you guys later.